Okay, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have Scott here. Scott, you've been behind one of the most impactful charities to humankind today. You're focusing on an essential need, water, which a lot of people don't have access to. I think it's over 1 billion at this point, based on what I saw on your site. And you've made a dent in that, a major dent. And you've also made charity something that isn't just like an afterthought. It's something that you can feel really a part of. There's great transparency into it. I mean, you have GPS locations of every single spot that you've done, had a project in. So I
This
think
is
it's
great,
really-
Ben. You want a job? You're fantastic at. This is the story.
So I'm excited to have you here and get into your story, Scott.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
let me just say the first thing. So the billion you mentioned was actually when we started. We have made a lot of progress as a sector. We are down to 700 million people who don't have access to clean water. So we went from 1 in 6 people alive when I started to 1 in 10 people alive. Now, 700 million is still an enormously massive problem. It's crazy to think that we live in a world where Elon is looking for clean water on Mars, 142 million miles away, and 10% of the planet is drinking dirty water. But we really have made some significant progress over that time.
Yeah, I think it's impressive. So you started out
Ben, I am so sorry. Just to pause for 1 second, I just realized that I'm not plugged in. And okay. I don't know that I get through. Can I pause just for 1 second and grab a power charger? And we can do it again if you need to. I'm so sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Will they want to edit that, or do you want to start over?
No, it's fine. We'll edit it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you started out kind of in a different world. I mean, you were in the nightclub world, you were in promoting world a bit. Then you had this drastic shift towards charity. How did that, what kind of made you all of a sudden just want to have a major change in life?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with, a little bit about my childhood. I mean, I was born in a very conservative Christian home. My mom was an invalid growing up. So when I was 4, she got a carbon monoxide gas leak and was poisoned by invisible gas. So, childhood was very different, only child, caregiver role, helping take care of her. And, I really wanted to be a doctor when I grew up. So I thought that I would cure my mom and I would cure other sick people like her. And then 18 happened and New York City happened. And I realized that instead of going on to medical school and continuing to play by the rules of the church, I wanted to become a nightclub promoter instead. So to the horror of my parents, I start drinking and smoking and drugging and, gambling and flying around the world chasing models in Fashion Week and really over 10 years, kind of make a mess out of my life. Although I was very successful at nightclub promoting. So I worked at 40 different nightclubs over 10 years. So on the outside, my life looked great. On the inside, I was just kind of a rotting, selfish sycophant. And it took me 10 years to come to that realization and wanted to have a radical life change. And I came back to a very lost Christian faith and morality. I mean, I had done nothing. I hadn't gone to church in 10 years. I had done nothing to serve or to give to charity. And just realized, man, I need a radical life change. I don't need a pivot. I need to start over. I need to just do the opposite. And I got this idea to volunteer for 1 year on a humanitarian mission. And I thought, maybe by serving others, it would disrupt my life and maybe help me on a new path. And that led me to post-war Liberia, West Africa, where I embedded with a group of humanitarian surgeons and doctors. And I became their photojournalist. So I was their storyteller, taking pictures and writing stories of the amazing work being done at the time in the poorest country in the world. So, imagine going from spraying bottles of $1,000 champagne from a DJ booth, over a fashion crowd to living in a country with no electricity and no running water and no sewage system and no mail uh, alongside these doctors who were, working in extremis really to help. And I loved it. I was so inspired by them, their acts of service. When the year finished, I just signed up for another year and went back. And in that second year, that's what led me to discover what was making so many people sick. And it was something I'd never considered in my entire life. It was dirty water. And I learned that half of the country I was living in was drinking dirty water, and half the disease in the country I was living in was because people were drinking dirty water. And I came home to New York City at 30 years old, just with a really simple idea. What if I try to make sure no one on earth drinks dirty water? What if I built a movement that would bring every single person on earth access to clean water? So that's what I've been up to for 18 years now.
So, Scott, a lot of people have thought about this water problem and have wanted to do something about it. You were this young guy at the time. You come back to New York. Why did you think you were going to be successful? Like, what were you thinking needed to be done different to actually get these people clean water?
Well, I mean, I get the benefit now of looking back for 18 years, but back then I didn't know that anything would be successful. I just was a promoter. So I'd been promoting the idea for 10 years that if you got past the velvet rope and into the right nightclub and you were seen with the right cute boys or the right cute girls, your life would have meaning. And I just started promoting something completely different, running around saying, hey, 1 billion people don't have water. That's not okay. We could do something about it. We need to do something about it. And, running around to different countries, taking pictures of the problem, taking pictures of the problem being solved, and then simply showing that to people and saying, don't you want to be a part of the solution? You could write a check and give an entire community clean water. And here's what it looks like at that moment when the $1 million drilling rig enters the village and 300 people surround it. And it drills for water, and clean water shoots up 100 feet into the sky as everybody is dancing and screaming and clapping and crying at the coming of clean water. That was worth promoting and inviting people to be a part of. That was, and there was no velvet rope. Everybody could be a part of that.
So the photos were really powerful to getting this going.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a visual communicator. So I think at the time, a lot of charities, they would put out white papers. They would ask you to read a 20-page document and look at the data of the problem. And we were telling stories. Here is a 13-year-old girl. She wakes up at 5 a.m. and she walks for water 8 hours a day. Because she has to walk for dirty water, she doesn't get a chance to go to school. She gets sick all the time. Here's how far it is to her health clinic when she gets sick. Here's how much it costs for her to buy medicine. And then documenting that journey alongside. Well, we know 13-year-old girls. I've got a daughter, who's approaching that age. And I think, both telling stories, but also showing true stories. This isn't just some sort of fable. I mean, her name is Ledikiros Hailu, and she lives here. And you can, put these coordinates in Google Earth, and you can see exactly the huts in that village, and you can have a location to it.
Yeah, I think that's powerful. That it was so you could really see the impact that was happening. And I mean, even now, you've made it so evident where all of this occurs. The locations of it. You photograph it, you make content around it. And I think that process and how visual it is that you mentioned just wasn't present, and it gives them a perspective like, wow, these people really need this when you see the raw emotions on their face.
Yeah, that's true.
So, at that point in time, I mean, when you were still getting started, how were you sustaining yourself financially? I think I read up that it wasn't easy for you having friends and family support you at a point. You had, you were going in debt. You were almost personally, having financial issues. How did you kind of overcome
kindness
that?
of strangers? I was sleeping on a closet floor in New York City for free rent, and people would take me out to breakfast and to lunch and to dinner. And, then I got the first donor, and I think it was a $5,000 check, and there was a little bit of money to buy supplies and to go hire a lawyer. I remember buying Nonprofits for Dummies, that yellow book, because I didn't know how to start a nonprofit. And, okay, I needed a board. I need lawyers to file for a 501c3. 501c3 is this thing that gives you charitable status and the ability to issue tax deductions. So I just learned everything, from the beginning. I think as so many entrepreneurs, and I'm sure other guests you've had on the podcast, you see a problem you want to solve, and then you figure out how to go and solve that problem. So, then there was a donor that, gave, I think, $50,000. And I think my first salary was 38 grand or $42,000, or, there was no health care. There was no benefit package. It was just a bunch of people working 100 hours a week and really 100 hours a week. I know this whole work-life balance thing is talked about. I can't imagine starting Charity Water with work-life balance. It was an existential, risk of the organization being insolvent every day. It took an extraordinary amount of work, of really, really, really hard work and activity to try to, create the thing, to get it to any sort of place where the organization could be sustainable.
How did you make it become so popular in New York and social scenes to want to back your charity?
It's interesting. A lot of people said, oh, you were a nightclub promoter. That's why you were so successful. And, I'm not a nightclub promoter, so how would I ever get my charity off the ground? It's interesting how few people that I knew or met from the 10 years actually became our donors. So I think it was more of the skill of, throwing a party, but a party for a purpose. We didn't do that many events. The activities were different than events. We weren't throwing parties in a nightclub to go and raise money. We were taking over gallery exhibitions. We were going to the streets of New York City with initiatives and with volunteers. We would go get a little space donated in Sundance, and we would all drive a truck out there with a bunch of pictures, and we would put them up. And as people came in, we would tell them what they were seeing in the pictures and ask them to help. So there were so many, grassroots activities in the early days. But I think, maybe one of the things we had going for us, I kind of mentioned earlier, like I didn't know what I was doing. I think that was an advantage. I was trying to create a charity for my friends, something that someone like me, a cynic or a skeptic, would believe in. And that's how the model developed. People that don't know, Charity Water has had a really unique business model now for almost 20 years, where 100% of all donations from the public go directly to build water projects that directly help people get clean water. And then I have another bank account, a separately audited bank account, where I raise with a small team all of that nasty, unsexy overhead money separately. And I raise that from a small group of private donors and entrepreneurs and business leaders. So that just simple idea of being able to go out, whatever the activity was, and say, hey, if you've got $10, spend all $10 will go directly to help someone get clean water. If you have 10 million, all 10 million could go directly to have. And then that was kind of step number one, this 100% model. Step two then was just building on that, saying, well, if we have two separately audited bank accounts with the charity, can't we build technology to track where the public's money goes? Can't we show them? Can't I follow Ben's $10 and say, here's where the money went? Ben, here's your well. Now, you didn't pay for that whole well. You paid for $10 of that. And here's all the other people that gave $10 or $50 or $1,000. So we kind of built proof in as this pillar. And then I think, the third thing that we were thinking about early on, when I say, it's like me and a bunch of volunteers sitting in a living room, was how do we build an epic brand, an inspiring, imaginative brand that's based on hope and opportunity and not guilt and shame? How do we become the Apple of charities, the Nike of charities, a charity that would inspire and not be a bummer, not make people feel guilty? There was a famous line by Nick Kristof in the New York Times, and he wrote that, toothpaste like Crest and Colgate were peddled with much more sophistication than all of the world's life-saving causes. So why is it that a toothpaste company was better at marketing than a life-saving charity, who was literally saving millions of lives around the world? So I was really interested in storytelling and marketing from day one as a way to achieve this objective of getting everybody clean water.
Were you noticing, Scott, that there was a problem with people wanting to give you commitments because they just didn't trust charities, and then you
Yes,
decided
so
to come up with this model?
42% of Americans don't trust charities. 70% of Americans believe charities waste their money. So that was just kind of a big aha. Like, well, what would make them trust? So 70% of Americans believe charities waste their money. How about if you showed them what you did with their money? Like, imagine that. Imagine that idea, right? And some of this stuff was so simple, but really the system, so many charities had been built on the idea of opacity. Like, you put all this money into this big giant pot and then you do a bunch of stuff, but you can't really tell anybody whose money went into the big giant pot because you have to pay all your overhead costs first and take care of all your people. And so I think we just stumbled into some of this stuff. Like, we have 2 bank accounts. We don't step on the public's money for any overhead. So therefore, if it's all going to Africa, India, Asia to go build water projects, why don't we just track it on the way out there?
How does the system work? So are you hiring people to kind of, go and like create these almost like these wells or dig up in certain areas? Like, is it your own system that you've developed? And how do you like monitor those situations in all these different places yourself?
We've got a team now of about 30 people, and their full-time job is going out there and deploying the capital that we raise. So, Charity Water now has raised over $1 billion, just for a sense of scale. We have 7,000 locals that are working on charity water projects across 22 different nations. So it's a big operation. The today is very, very sophisticated. In the early days, it was like, we have $15,000. Who can go drill 1 well in Uganda? And then we went and we found a well driller. And he said, if you pay me the money, I'll drill a well. And we found a place that needed a well and we drilled it. That now has happened 171,000 times with now, a very deep level of rigor and sophistication. So, just maybe a quick, how we work. There's 700 million people without water. 80% of them live in rural areas. We only focus on rural areas. Those are the people that are left behind. So we don't focus on the 20%, the cities and towns. Then we eliminate conflict zones. We're not in Yemen. We're not in South Sudan. We're not in Somalia. We're not in a Gaza-Israel conflict, right? We're trying to do sustainable long-term water projects. So that knocks out a bunch of countries. Then we start at the bottom of the United Nations Poverty Index, and we start working our way up. And that's led us to 22 countries that meet that criteria. Then we go find a local partner, somebody who knows how to operate the equipment, who knows how to deliver high quality, sustainable water solutions. And then we sit with them and say, all right, what are you doing now? What do you hope to do? And how can we help with our funding? And how can we help with our expertise? And then we will grow those organizations, both through people, through tools, through drilling rigs, through our funding. So that's how we've gotten almost 20 million people access to clean water. So it's kind of an asset light model, but it allows us to quickly scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely does. We're at a point now where you mentioned the amount of people that don't have water. What do you think it's going to take to actually get this problem completely gone? And do you even think that's possible, Scott?
Yeah, it is. So it's about $130 billion gets everybody clean water. That is about, I think, what we've spent on Ukraine aid. It's 13 cents on the dollar of one of those $1 trillion stimulus bills where we printed $1 trillion. It's about 40% of the money sitting in United States donor advised funds, money that's already been parked philanthropically. So this is an amount of money that it's not that big. It's not that much money, honestly. What the problem is that we have not allocated that amount of money. And we have not built a movement that raises their hands and says, hey, I don't want people to die of bad water, because this is an issue that doesn't affect people. I remember speaking with the CEO of a famous cancer charity once, and we were at the Inc. 5000 conference, and there's 5,000 people in the audience, and he gets out and says, raise your hand if you've had cancer. Some hands go up. Raise your hand if a family member's had cancer. At least half the audience. Raise your hand if a friend or a coworker. 100% of the audience. All 5,000 people had been touched by cancer. And then he starts his pitch, talking about cancer research and the money needed, right? I get out in front of 5,000 people and say, how many of you have had to drink poisonous, toxic, brown, viscous water? right? How many of you women have had to walk 8 hours a day for water, worrying about being raped as you walk through the jungle, right? How many of you have lost a child to typhoid or trachoma or bilharzia or schistosomiasis or cholera, right? Zero. So I think that's why the problem hasn't been solved. It's a problem that affects others, not us. People living on $2 a day, $3 a day.
Is there a way to make it more relatable? I know early on you mentioned you had success with like photographs and just other types of media to convey this, but because people aren't experiencing the problem, it may be hard for them to relate. How do you make it more relatable?
I think storytelling, we just built an immersive experience lab in Nashville, Tennessee, and people come into the lab and they walk into a room that's 80 degrees and there's a giant treadmill in the room, and an immersive video starts playing as LED walls wrap around them of a 12-year-old girl who's walking for water, and she invites them to come along. And we ask you to pick up a 40-pound can and try it just for 5 minutes. Most people can't finish the 5 minutes. It's too heavy. It's too hot. Well, 200 million hours are wasted by women and girls walking for dirty water every day. So, we're really looking for new ways. We have a virtual reality experience where people put on a headset and they experience the 6 days where a community gets clean water for the first time. So we're really thinking of ways to use storytelling and visual images and video to bring people into this issue and then ask them for help.
Yeah, that's great. It's just kind of incredible that with $100-something billion, everybody in the world could have clean water, and it's not done yet.
It's not done yet. I mean, there's honestly not a single person, a single kind of major philanthropist who has, raised their hand and said, I'm going to give everybody clean water. So we're out there looking for that person. No $1 billion commitment even. Not even $1 billion commitment to clean water.
Huh. Wow. You still raised $1 billion. So you've had impact.
It's taken a long time.
Yeah. So, if you had to like kind of break down, Scott, like some short-term goals, some long-term goals that you have currently, what would you say those are to get to this point where everybody has clean water?
Well, I'm trying to help 100 million people. So my kind of next step, how do we go from 20 million served to 100 million? So yes, I want to see everybody on earth get access to clean water, but that's kind of the next mile marker for us. We have a monthly giving program that we call the Spring. So that's kind of like Spotify or Netflix or Disney Plus, except it's for clean water. And 100% of what people give every month goes directly to provide clean water for people in need. That has been one of the biggest drivers of growth. So not actually the billionaires or the millionaires. It's everyday people saying, I could give $20 a month. It only costs $40 to give one person access to clean water. So I'm working on that program. That's called the Spring. We have members now in 149 countries around the world. We have kids that give their allowance. We have 90-year-olds that give out of their pension. So I'm trying to grow that. I'm also, going after high net worths and business owners and entrepreneurs who can make much bigger commitment. And, with the stroke of one check, help 1 million people get access to clean water and go on a journey to transform, a huge amount of lives.
Yeah. So you also named, the way you named the charity, it is the cause. And you made it like charity water, like simple like that. What kind of went into the branding behind it? And do you think that that's been a huge aspect of your success?
Yeah, the name is not very creative, but at least it's clear. We're a charity that helps people get water. The colon was actually my first idea. I was even more ambitious. I believed that I could copy Richard Branson and I could launch many charities: charity education, charity health, charity water, charity shelter. And all of these would be funded. The overhead would be funded by private donors and entrepreneurs. And then 100% of the money the public would give would go directly to those projects. I learned how big the water crisis was. And what was really cool is I also learned that by focusing on water, I could do almost everything else I wanted to do next. So rather than go build schools and achieve education that way, go bring clean water to schools, because half of the schools throughout developing water didn't have clean water. And this was the top reason why teenage girls were dropping out of school. There was no water. There were no toilets at their schools. They would get their periods. They'd stay home 4 or 5 days every month, fall behind their studies. There was no water in their village. They had to go get the water. So instead of being educated, they were walking for dirty water. I cared about health, right? Charity health. That was one of the other days. Well, half the disease in so many of these countries is waterborne. So rather than go build health clinics, just go make sure everybody has clean water. Women and girls, economic opportunity. Every dollar you invest in water and sanitation, water and toilet facilities yields 4 to 8 times economic return in those villages. So, rather than go work on microfinance, just go work on water and make people not only healthier, but make them wealthier.
Just the last question that I have, what's like your big picture vision now? Where do you see charity water going? Like, I know you mentioned some goal wise, but like, what's your big picture vision for the impact?
We're like in the top of the second inning of this thing. I mean, I know we've been around for a while, but the goal really is that everybody on Earth has clean water. This is not an outrageous goal. This is not too much to ask that people on planet Earth, a planet with myriad resources and wealth, that they have the most basic need for human life met. We're not looking for a cure for water. See, that's maybe both the exciting and the frustrating thing. It's not cancer research, right? We don't have people in a lab spending billions of dollars trying to figure out how they can, mix test tubes and different, clinical trials together. We have the cure for water. We haven't implemented it, but we know definitively how to help all 703 million people, every single man, woman, and child alive. We know how to bring them clean water. We haven't built the movement. We haven't gotten enough people involved. Too many people sit apathetically by, with any of these paralyzing global issues. But we know how to do it. So the future is really inviting people on a podcast like this to consider an issue, consider the thing they've taken for granted perhaps their entire life, and say, shoot, I could give $40 a month. There might be someone listening who said, I could give $10,000 and give a whole community, knock out 250 people, with one check or a swipe of a credit card. So, it's really about growing the movement and just getting it done. It can be done.
Yeah, definitely can. And I think, I definitely appreciate what you've done to make an impact in the space. I think there needs to be more awareness around it because it's a problem we can solve and we have the funding to do it. So we got to get it done. So thanks for coming on, sharing your story, Scott. And I hope that some people, do back you in this mission.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the chance. And for people listening, you could just go to charitywater.org. Ben was mentioning the visuals. We have over 1,000 videos that we've made. You can check out our YouTube channel and, learn a little more of the story. There's one video called The Spring. If you go to thespring.com, it's had over 100 million views. And it's a great way to kind of, you can hear me talk about when you see it, it hits differently for some people. So that's thespring.com. And yeah, we invite people just to learn more about this issue. And a lot of people, that interact with the organization tell us, I've never thought of water the same way again in my life. And I think that's a good thing.
Definitely.